Good morning, guys. It's Saturday morning, and I just want to let you know that I am in here making this video for you instead of being outside working in my garden, which is what I would really like to be doing, but I'm hoping to go do that after I'm finished with this one. So today we're going to be talking very briefly, I hope, about answering questions about figurative language, specifically simile, metaphor, and personification. So one question I'm sure you're asking is, what should I expect from questions about figurative language on your reading assessment? At this point, by the 8th grade, you should not expect to see just identification questions. They know that you know what a simile looks like, and you should be able to find a metaphor in the text. At this point in time, you should be able to start interpreting what the author means by those types of metaphors and similes by using figurative language. And if you don't, then we're going to go over some strategies today to make sure that you're able to kind of extract the meaning that the author wants you to get. You should probably be very familiar with the types of figurative language, which at this point really shouldn't be new information. You've been over them in years past. We've been over them this year. Figurative language, really, identification should not be that difficult for you. And you're going to need to be able to figure out why the author probably used this type of language and its connotation or denotation. So is it meant to give you a positive impression or a negative impression? And again, we're going to go over some specific strategies for how you can do that. There are a couple of things that are going to be common for all figurative language questions. The first thing you have to do, just like with the rest of the items that we've been talking about, you have to know what your target is. You have to know which paragraph you need to look at. You need to know what phrase or sentence in particular you're focusing on, and you need to look for some key phrases. Figurative meaning, is this a metaphor? Which simile compares this to this? Why did the author use this example of personification? So as long as you know kind of the key terms that go with figurative language, and you can figure out where they're at in the paragraph, then you've got the basic strategies for what you need to be able to answer a figurative language question. Just like in vocabulary, you can also use context clues to identify figurative language meanings. You're probably going to need to read the paragraph around or the entire selection to be able to figure out why an author used a particular metaphor to describe this character. But we'll talk about that again here in the specific strategies. So we're going to start out with similes because similes tend to be the easiest. Some specific strategies for similes is the first thing you need to know is that similes are comparisons that use the word like or as. You guys know that. Those are probably going to be the easiest examples of figurative language, and really the interpretation part is the only part that should be even slightly challenging for you about simile questions. One thing I am going to ask you to do is to have an anchor example. I'm sorry, my dog is going crazy. Hold on just a minute. I'm going to pause this. Okay, sorry about that, guys. My neighbors are doing some yard work, and they always bring their stupid dogs with them, and my dogs don't like their dogs. Anyway, back to similes. So, your anchor example. Your anchor example needs to be a simile that you can easily remember. It might be a simile that you found in a poem. It might be a simile that you've seen in a book. It might even be a simile that you've seen in a song. That's fine. Wherever it comes from, you just need the anchor example to be able to base, okay, this is what a simile looks like. This is what I do with it. My anchor example that we're going to be working with today is from the book Thief. And some of you may remember it because we actually did an interpretation activity with this simile. A fat sun breaking through the clouds like God sitting down at his dinner table. Marcus Zusak has such a way with words. He's fantastic. The one thing that you should not do when you're interpreting similes is to rely only on the words like and as. Because if you do, the test people, they know that you're doing that. So they're going to use other examples that contain the words like or as just to simply throw you off. So you need to make sure that there's a comparison there, not just the author using the word like or as, because that's not the only way to identify a simile. Then after you're sure that you have a simile, there are two key questions you need to ask yourself. What two things are being compared? What is the writer saying these two things have in common? We're going to go through this process specifically with my example. And here it is. A fat sun breaking through the clouds like God sitting down at his dinner table. Alright, So we need to decide what is part one of the comparison. Well, usually part one of the comparison comes first in the sentence. So I see that my first part of the comparison is a fat sun breaking through the clouds. Okay, now I'm going to get a picture in my head of this is what a fat sun breaking through the clouds looks like. Then I need to decide, well, what's the second thing being compared? What is part two of my comparison? Like God sitting down at his dinner table. God sitting down at his dinner table. Well, then I want to think about, what do I imagine God's dinner table looks like? Maybe not necessarily like this, because I do tend to prefer the jellied cranberry sauce as opposed to the whole berry. And those green beans don't really look like the kind that I would like. But that turkey looks tasty. So what do I imagine God sitting down at his dinner table to look like? Now, I got to decide, what is the author saying these things have in common? What does he want me to walk away from this simile with? Well, the first thing I pick up on is the fact that probably if God is sitting down at his dinner table, which I imagine to be fully loaded with lots of tasty and delicious things, or a sun breaking through the clouds, and it's a big sun, a noticeable sun, I'm going to guess that both of these things intend to stay for a while. They're going to stay put. Both of those things should bring kind of an image of fullness to your mind as you read them. Like I said, imagine a big fat sun. It's not a skinny sun. It's not a weak sun. It's a big fat sun breaking through the clouds. And then God's dinner table. Well, I mean, who has a better dinner table than God, right? It's going to be a full dinner table. I think both of these things are meant to convey a positive image. Anytime you've got light breaking from darkness, or a full table and someone sitting down at it, we think of those things as positive images. And I think more than anything, the connotation is of completion, of something being accomplished. The sun breaks through the clouds and is intending to stay in the sky. It's going to be a nice day. God sitting down at his dinner table. It's fully loaded. It's a beautiful table. He's going to sit down and enjoy a fantastic meal. Both of those things kind of show a permanence, that this is going to be happening for a while. Asking those two important questions should help you figure out not only what two things are being compared and what the simile is, but also kind of what it's meaning, and what the author wants you to pick up on. Just a minute. I'm going to yell at my son. Just warning. Ian! Please stop doing that! Yeah, again, sorry about that. It's a noisy morning here at the Jules Rude household. Second thing we're going to talk about is metaphors and specific strategies for dealing with metaphors. Now, realistically speaking, we call metaphorical language in real English anytime that somebody says something that is not intended literally. However, when they ask you about metaphors on a standardized test, they're almost always talking about two things being compared, but the comparison is directly stating something is something else. I also need you to find an anchor example of this type of figurative language. Find a metaphor. Again, it can come from anywhere, but it should be a metaphor that you can remember easily and one that can be memorized. So you have it, you know it, and you can compare this statement in this text that I just read to my anchor example. Is in a metaphor. Does it look the same? So my anchor example comes from the poem Mending Wall by Robert Frost, which is one of my absolute favorite poems ever. And it goes, he is all pine and I am apple orchard. You may have picked up that this contains two metaphors, and we're going to work with both of them and go through the process of identifying the metaphor and interpreting its meaning for both of them, so you get a little double practice with this. You need the same key questions to ask as those you use for simile. Two things that are being compared, what are they? And what is the writer saying that these two things have in common? But the difference between a simile and a metaphor is a lot of times the simile is self-interpreting. You get more detail a lot of times. However, metaphors are a little more vague by definition. Similes can be the same way sometimes. Use your context clues, just like you do with vocabulary. Make sure you know what the passage itself is saying about the subjects of your simile or your metaphor. So that will help you to interpret its meaning based in the passage. he is all pine and I am apple orchard comes from Mending Wall, where the author is talking about his neighbor and they have to meet every springtime to walk down a rock wall that runs down in between their properties. It falls down every winter, and they have to meet in the middle and fix it as they walk down the path of the wall. And the author, the artist, he thinks that he would like to take the wall down, but the neighbor only says good fences make good neighbors. So we have a very straight-laced person with a very free-spirited, artistic kind of personality, and that's the contrast. So first thing we want to do is to take he is all pine, because that is our first metaphor. And part one of the comparison is he. He is the neighbor in the poem. Now I know, because I've read the poem and I have some context, that the neighbor in the poem is straight-laced, he's upright, he's stodgy, he's set in his ways, he is very traditional. He is being compared to a pine forest. And, I got to think to myself, what does a pine forest look like? Then, what is the author saying these two things have in common? Well, a pine forest, it grows in straight lines. Either because somebody planted it that way, or really pine forests in general just look that way in nature. The trees tend to grow straight up and down. There's not a lot of branches. They're not messy. They are very neat, orderly trees. They are orderly. They are traditional. They grow in straight lines. They're neat, and we know what to expect from them. Pine trees don't just go sprouting up everywhere with a lot of undergrowth. They're going to grow straight up. They're going to have some branches at the top, but they're going to be pretty contained and neat. So our neighbor being compared to a pine forest means that he is all of these things. Then the second part of the metaphor is I am apple orchard. What two things are being compared? I, who is the speaker of the poem, and I know because I've read the poem and I have the context that he's artistic, he's creative, he's a little mischievous, he wants to tear down the wall. He's kind of the traditional artistic poetic personality, and he's comparing himself to an apple orchard. So I pulled up a picture of an apple orchard here for you, and you can kind of see the difference between an apple orchard and a pine forest. Apple orchards are messier, they're less predictable. It doesn't go in straight lines. Alright, so what do I say that these two, or what is the author saying that these two things have in common? What does the author want me to pick up on? He's saying that apple orchards, just like him, is wilder. It's something that's untraditional. It's something that can't be confined in neat lines, which goes along with the poem, because the poem is about a wall. Good fences make good neighbors. Well, he doesn't think so. He doesn't think he can be confined by a neat line. They are producers. They make things. Apple orchards produce apples. Artistic personalities produce art. And the things that they do are unexpected. So he's using this metaphor to kind of develop the characters. Okay guys, I got about 1.5 minutes to finish talking about this. So the first thing you have to do is figure out what's the noun and what are the verbs. And this is for personification. The subject, of course, is soul. I'm sorry about my phone again. The subject is soul. What does the soul do? The soul selects and shuts. What is human? Well, we think about souls as being human, but souls are not human. They're not. They're a thing. Can a soul select? Can it shut? No. No, of course it can't. So the human action is selecting and shutting. What is non-human? The soul is non-human. The soul can't select anything on its own. It has to be with a person in order to do that. And it cannot shut the door unless it's contained in a body. So does this literally happen? Does this literally, the soul selects her own majority and then shuts the door? Well, no, of course not. No, this is a figurative happening. This is the way people choose their friends. Alright, so your assignment for this video is by Tuesday, May the 1st, you need to locate an anchor example for simile, metaphor, personification. You need to work on memorizing those examples, and you need to go through the process of interpreting. Go through the breakdown process. Make sure you do not try to use my anchor examples. My anchors cannot be your anchors. You need to find your own. It can come from anywhere. It can come from a piece of literature, poem, novel, a song, anything at all. But it should help you remember these basic concepts. Alright, I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Don't forget you've got 2 other videos that will be posted on YouTube.